All right, well, today we have a special treat. One of the things about learning the Bible, especially learning the book of Genesis, which we've been going through, is knowing where places are located. And so we've just started studying the life of Abraham, and we're going to be eventually getting to the life of Isaac and the life of Jacob. And so it's a wonderful thing to have John Thomas back with us today. And he's been taking classes at Crown College of the Bible down in Powell, Tennessee. And one of his classes is Bible geography. And so we're going to see kind of what he's learned down at Crown College. And also, hopefully, this will give us a better perspective as we study the book of Genesis. So, John, come here and help us understand this.
Well, today we're going to be covering three people. That's Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And here's the two maps we have. This is of the broad Middle East. This is Mesopotamia. And then this is the Holy Land, Israel. This is a closer up land picture of the Holy Land and of Israel. We're going to start out in Genesis chapter 11. So if everybody will turn to Genesis 11. Start out with the life of Abraham, since he's the one who God called. We'll get to that. Genesis chapter 11, verse 27 through 32. And then we'll keep on reading into chapter 12, verse 1 through 5. Now these are the generations of Terah. Terah begat Abram, Nahor, and Haran. And Haran begat Lot. And Haran died before his father Terah, in the land of his nativity, in Ur of the Chaldees. And Abraham and Nahor took them wives. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai, and the name of Nahor's wife, Malachah, and the daughter of Haran, the father of Milcah, and the father of Iscah. But Sarai was barren. She had no children. And Terah took Abram his son, and Lot, the son of Haran, his son's son, and Sarai his daughter-in-law, his son Abram's wife, and they went forth with them from Ur of the Chaldees, to go into the land of Canaan. And they came unto Haran, and dwelt there. And the days of Terah were 205 years, and Terah died in Haran. And then go into chapter 12. Now the Lord had said unto Abram, Get thee out of thy country, and from thy kindred, and from thy father's house, unto a land that I will show thee. And I will make of thee a great nation, and I will bless thee, and make thy name great. And thou shalt be a blessing. And I will bless them that bless thee, and curse them that curse thee. And in thee shall all families of the earth be blessed. So Abram departed, as the Lord had spoken unto him. And Lot went with him, and Abram was 75 years old when he departed out of Haran. And Abram took Sarai his wife, and Lot, his brother's son, and all their substance that they had gathered, and the souls that they had gotten in Haran, and they went forth to go into the land. So we see here's Ur of the Chaldees, in the traditional Mesopotamia area. It's somewhere in this area, but this is the modern day Ur, where they think it is. And there's only two ways to get to the land where God was leading them, and that was the land of Canaan. You could either go along the river, up through here where there was places for your cattle to feed, or you could go through the desert. The Ryrie Study Bible, which is what I'm using here, has a note, and it says, verse 31, the commentary says, God called Abram while he was in Ur. Only two routes to Canaan were available. One across the Arabian desert, which we see here, which was impossible for transporting large herds because there was no things for them to eat. And the other along the Euphrates and the Haran. Here's Haran. And so what Abram chose, was to go this way to get into the Holy Land. He went north along the Euphrates River to Haran, and that's where his father died. And then as soon as his father died, God called him out again to go into the Holy Land, and he took his brother's son, Lot, and his family, and all of his servants, and all of his cattle. So the next event we see in Abram's life, he goes to a place called Shechem. That is, as he's going down to the Holy Land, he goes to Shechem. Look on here. Right here is about, there's Damascus, and Damascus is right here. He comes down in here, and Shechem is right here. So he's going right down the coastal area of the Holy Land. And then we see something terrible that happens. Go to verse 8. Chapter 12, verse 8. And he removed from thence unto a mountain on the east of Bethel, and pitched his tent, having Bethel on the west, and Hai, or Ai, on the east. And there he builded an altar unto the Lord, and called upon the name of the Lord. So he settled here, in this area, this generic area, and then we see, continuing in the verse, and Abram journeyed, going on still southward. So he settled here. Ai is right around Jericho, and then Shiloh, Shechem is here, and Bethel's over here. He says he still goes south in verse 9. And there was a famine in the land. And Abram went down into Egypt to sojourn there, for the famine was grievous in the land. So instead of trusting God, God led him to the Holy Land, Israel, modern-day Israel. God led him here. And instead of trusting God to keep him and sustain him here, he went down into Egypt, out of the land of promise, which is Canaan. So he goes down, he starts here, goes up to Haran, goes down through Israel, and into Egypt. Now, the patriarchs had a fascination with going south, and we will get to the cycles of them going back and forth between either Egypt or Gaza from Canaan. So he went to Egypt, and I'll read a passage of that. Verse 11, And it came to pass, when he was come near to enter into Egypt, that he said unto Sarai his wife, this is verse 11, Behold now, I know that thou art fair woman to look upon. Therefore it shall come to pass, when the Egyptians shall see thee, they shall say, This is his wife, and they will kill me. But they will save thee alive. Say, I pray thee, that thou art my sister, that it may be well with me for thy sake, and my soul shall live because of thee. And in the time, they eventually figure out it's his wife, and Pharaoh is not happy that Abram hid this thing from him. And so he goes back, he leaves Egypt eventually, and goes back to where we see in verse 12:8. So he goes back to this place between Bethel and, Bethel and Ai. He goes back to there. And that's where he stays for a little while. Then we see the breaking off of Lot, his brother's son, his nephew. Chapter 13, verse 8. And Abram said unto Lot, Let there be no strife, I pray thee, between me and thee, and between my herdmen and thy herdmen, for we are brethren. Is not the whole land before thee? Separate thyself, I pray thee, from me. If thou wilt take the left hand, then I will go to the right. Or if thou depart to the right hand, then I will go to the left. And Lot lifted up his eyes, and beheld all the plain of Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere, before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, even as the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, as thou comest unto Zoar. So they are right here, and they have a disagreement. Lot's servants have a disagreement with Abram's servants, and they get into fighting each other. And so Lot separates himself from Abram. He looks into the plain of Jordan. This is the Jordan River. This is the Salt or Dead Sea. And he is in this area, and he looks this way. So somewhere over here, it doesn't specifically say. This map seems to think that Sodom and Gomorrah are down here, but it's not been, because it was destroyed. We don't have any evidence of where it was. And so here is where they say it is, but it was somewhere in this Jordan plain. So Lot goes that way. And then verse 13, chapter 13, verse 18, says, And Abram removed his tent, and came and dwelt in the plain of Mamre, which is in Hebron, and built there an altar unto the Lord. So Lot chose this area, and somewhere in there, and Abram went from where he was dwelling near Bethel and Ai. He went south towards Hebron. This is Hebron. So he just goes south a little bit to the plain of Mamre, which is near Hebron. Then we see an adventure that Abram finds himself in. And let's keep on reading. Chapter 14, verse 1. And it came to pass in the days of Amraphel, king of Shinar, Arok, king of Eleazar, and then has a bunch of kings, that they were mad with the king of Sodom and Gomorrah, especially the place where Lot lived. And these kings, in chapter 14, fought with the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah. They captured it. The other kings beat them, and then they had them rounded up. And then I see in verse, 14, verse 15, and he divided himself against them, he and his servants by night, and smote them. So Abram got him a little bit of a posse, and they went up and attacked the kings that were running north towards Dan. Dan is up here, so they came from Sodom and Gomorrah area, which is somewhere here, and they go north. Abram is here. He chases them, and so they're going towards Dan. In verse 15, I'll read it again. And he divided himself against them, he and his servants, by night, and smote them, and pursued them unto Habba, which is on the left hand of Damascus. So even farther. There's Dan, there's Damascus. It's somewhere in this area. And he brought back all the goods, and also brought again his brother Lot, and his goods, and the women also, and the people. And the king of Sodom went out to meet him, after he returned from the slaughter of Chedorlaomer, and the kings that were with him, at the valley of Shaveh. This is verse 17, which is the king's dale. And then here we see Melchizedek, which is the king of Salem. He brought forth bread and wine, and was at the priest, and he was the priest of the Most High God. And he blessed him and said, Blessed be Abram of the Most High God, possessor of heaven and earth. And we see the interaction between Abram and Melchizedek is somewhere in here. There's Dan. It says earlier in the verses, in verse 14, that he chased him unto Dan, and then it says left of Damascus. So they're up here. That's where Abram recaptures Lot. The next event that happens, he goes back down home to Hebron in the plain of Mamre. But the next event that happens is chapter 20. Let's see. Once again, Abram is feeling, so it's now Abraham. His name changes to Abraham during this time period when God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. After this, and God comes to Abraham and renews his vow with him and his covenant, and his name is now Abraham, and he is the father of many nations. Yet he does not have a son yet. So he goes down from Hebron to chapter 20, verse 1. And Abram journeyed from thence, this area, right here, toward the south country, and dwelt between Kadesh and Shur, and sojourned to Gerar. And Abram said to Sarah his wife, She is my sister. And Abimelech king of Gerar sent, and took Sarah. So we see Abimelech king of Gerar. That is near Gaza. So it's in this south country. There's the Gerar River right here. But it's in this area. So he goes from here, from Hebron, over this way to Abimelech, the king. And I noticed that this happened. It already happened with Egypt, that he claims that Sarah is his wife. And we'll see it happen again with Abimelech. And it came to pass that they brought them, chapter 20, verse 3. But God came to Abimelech in a dream by night, and said unto him, Behold, thou art but a dead man, for the woman which thou hast taken, he took Sarah, for she is a man's wife. But Abimelech had not come near her. And he said, Lord, wilt thou slay also a righteous nation? Said he not unto me, She is my sister? And she even herself said, He is my brother. In the integrity of my heart, and in innocency of my hands, have I done this. And God said unto him, In a dream, yea, I know that thou didst this in the integrity of thy heart, for I also withheld thee from sinning against me. Therefore suffered I thee not to touch her. And then God tells Abimelech to restore Abraham unto his wife Sarah, and the king Abimelech gets pretty mad, and God had put a curse on the nation there at Gerar, and Abimelech king of Gerar, and they pretty much kick Abraham out, and they go back to their spot of, they go to Beersheba, actually. So let's read 21:33. They go back to this region, though. Chapter 21, verse 33. And Abraham planted a grove in Beersheba, and called there on the name of the Lord, the everlasting God. So Abram sojourned in the Philistines' land many days. So this is all in the southern country. So he goes from Gerar to Beersheba. So he goes from Hebron to Gaza. He gets kicked out of there because they get really mad at him. And he goes to Beersheba. Then after that, we have this event of Isaac. Isaac has been born, and we have this event of Isaac being offered as a sacrifice. Chapter 22, we could read this passage. 22, starting in verse 1. And it came to pass after these things that God did tempt Abram, and said unto him, Abraham. And he said, Behold, here am I. And he said, Take now thy son, thine only son Isaac, whom thou lovest, and get thee into the land of Moriah, and offer him there for a burnt offering upon one of the mountains, which I will tell thee of. And Abram rose up early in the morning, and sat on his ass, and took 2 of his young men with him, and Isaac his son, and clave the wood for the burnt offering, and rose up and went to the place of which God had told him. Then on the 3rd day Abraham lifted up his eyes, and he saw the place afar off. And the event, the story unfolds, and he puts Isaac on the altar, and God tells him not to slay his son. And we think it's somewhere, it doesn't say exactly where it's at in this passage, but we think it's somewhere near Jerusalem, and this map thinks it's right in this area, near Hebron. And so he goes from Beersheba in the land of the Philistines north, and then he comes back after that event takes place. He goes back to Beersheba, and then his death is back in Hebron. So he gets older, and Isaac starts to he gets a wife.
Jerusalem?
Jerusalem is right here. So he gets older, and he dies in the plain of Mamre, and that is where this cave is, that his wife Sarah died, and they bought it off the people in that region. And we will not get into all that, but I'll just read verse 1 of chapter 23. And Sarah was 127 years old. These were the years of the lifespan of Sarah. And Sarah died in Kirjath Arba, the same is Hebron, in the land of Canaan. And Abraham came to mourn for Sarah and to weep for her. So Sarah dies here in the land of Hebron, and they buy a plot of land and they bury her there. Now we get into a side plot, and that is Isaac. And Abraham's servant was sent to get a son for Isaac. And we see that in chapter 24. And Abraham was old, verse 1, and was well stricken in age, and the Lord had blessed Abraham in all things. And Abraham said unto his eldest servant in his house, that ruled over all that he had, Put, I pray thee, thy hand under my thigh, and I will make thee swear by the Lord, the God of heaven, and the God of the earth, that thou shalt not take a wife unto my son of the daughters of the Canaanites, among whom I dwell. But thou shalt go into my country, and to my kindred, and take a wife unto my son Isaac. And the servant said unto him, Peradventure the woman will not be willing to follow me unto this land. Must I needs bring back thy son again unto the land from whence thou camest? And Abraham said unto him, Beware thou that thou bring not my son thither again. The Lord God of heaven, which took me from my father's house, and from the land of my kindred, and which spake unto me, and that sware unto me, saying, Unto thy seed will I give this land. He shall send his angel before thee, and thou shalt take a wife unto my son from thence. And then I'm not going to go into the story for time's sake, but he leaves this area where they were living, and he goes north, the servant does, to the land of Haran, which is where his kindred was, where his folks were from. And he goes north, and he stops, and he meets he prays and asks God to send him a wife for Isaac, and he goes to a well. And this lady named Rebecca, she stops him, or he asks for some water, and she feeds his camels water. She gives his water to his camels, and she gives him water. And that's exactly what he asked for. And then, long story short, he goes from Haran, his brother Laban, and then he gets Rebecca. Rebecca agrees to go, and he goes back south, down to where they were living, and that is this general area. And they traveled back and forth. They were living both in Hebron and Beersheba, because he planted a grove in Beersheba. So, and then they had wells all in that area. But we get to, sorry, I dropped that. We get to the servant. He goes to the city of Nahor, which is by Hebron, and then he comes back. And so let's go to 25, verse 11. 25, verse 11. Chapter 25. 24 is the long story of him getting Rebekah as wife. 25 says, verse 11, and it came to pass, after the death of Abraham, so Abraham dies, that Isaac dwelt in the land, dwelt by the well Laroi. So in verse 10, the field which Abraham purchased of the sons of Heth, there was Abraham buried, and Sarah his wife. So in the same field in Hebron that Sarah was buried in, so was Abraham buried. And then we get to move on to our next character, which is Isaac. Readjust my page. Isaac starts out in the plains of Mamre, which is by Hebron. And he goes from there to a sidetrack, which is chapter 26, verse 1. And there was famine in the land. It happens a lot. Beside the first famine that was in the days of Abraham. So it's another famine. It wants to separate, show that there's a difference, because the stories are very similar. And Isaac went unto Abimelech, king of the Philistines, unto Gerar. So Isaac's doing the same thing that Abraham did. Abraham went from here to Gerar in the Philistines region. Isaac, now, his son, is going into Gerar in the Philistines region. And it says in verse 2, and the Lord appeared unto him and said, go not down into Egypt, dwell in the land which I shall tell thee of. Sojourn in this land, and I will be with thee, and will bless thee. For unto thee and unto thy seed I will give all these countries. And I will perform the oath which I swear unto Abraham thy father. And I will make thy seed to multiply, as the stars of heaven, and will give unto thy seed all these countries. And in thy seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed. And Isaac dwelt, verse 6, in Gerar, and the men of the place asked him of his wife. And he said, she is my sister. For he feared to say, she is my wife, lest, said he, the men of the place should kill me for Rebekah, because she was fair to look upon. So we see the same story as Abraham. He says to his wife, this is my sister, and to the people there, this is my sister, so that he would not get killed. And Abimelech called Isaac, verse 9, and said, behold, of a surety she is thy wife. How sayest thou, she is my sister? And Isaac said unto him, Abimelech, because I said, lest I die for her. In verse 10, and Abimelech said, what is this that thou hast done unto us? One of the people might lightly have lined with thy wife, and thou shouldest have brought guiltiness upon us. And Abimelech charged all his people, saying, he that toucheth this man or his wife shall surely be put to death. Then Isaac, verse 12, sowed in the land, and received in the same year an hundredfold, and the Lord blessed him. So he settled here for a little bit in the land of the Philistines, and he sowed out seeds, or whatever he was doing in his life there in the land of the Philistines, and God blessed him a hundredfold. So it's like putting out $1 and getting back $100. He very much prospered in the land of the Philistines. And so because of that, the Philistines kicked him out, because he was making too much money, and it made them look bad, and was taking a lot of their stuff because he was so prosperous. And so he went back into Beersheba, and we can look and let's see. He went to Beersheba, and that is where he lived, and we get another character named Jacob. And Jacob, as far as we know, he was born in Beersheba. He might have been born before then, but his story starts in Beersheba.
Where's Beersheba?
Beersheba is right here. So there's Hebron, there's Jerusalem, which has not been associated with the Hebrews, but then there's Shechem, Shiloh, which they've been in all these places, and then there's Ai and Bethel, which they landed between there. There's Hebron, and then Beersheba. And those are all the places that they've lived so far. So in Beersheba, Jacob goes to a place named Luz. Chapter 28, verse 19. 28:19. So Jacob, to give you some history, Jacob and Esau. Jacob stole Esau's blessing. And Esau is mad at him, and so he flees to find him a wife up in Haran, because that is where his mother told him to go. So he's on his way from here in the area of Canaan, and he's going up to Haran.
And Jacob and Esau are brothers.
Yes, Jacob and Esau are brothers. And you can read all about that in chapter 27. And you can see the deception of Jacob and why his brother hated him. He stole his birthright, and then he stole the blessing. But he is now fleeing, and he is in this place of Bethel. Bethel is right in this area. They don't have it on this map. I do not know why, but Bethel is in this area. And it says in verse 19, chapter 28, verse 19, "And he called the name of that place Bethel, but the name of that city was called Luz after the first. And Jacob vowed a vow, saying, If God will be with me, and will keep me in this way that I go, and will give me bread to eat and raiment to put on, so that I come again to my father's house in peace, then shall the Lord be my God. And this stone which I have set for a pillar shall be God's house, and all that thou shalt give me I will surely give the tenth unto thee." And so Jacob just had this dream of the stair ladder and going up to God and coming down. And he names the place that he slept on and slept at Bethel. So that is right over here. And one thing that's in Genesis is it has some modern references contemporary with the time of Moses. And even the regions are contemporary with the time of Moses when he writes this. And so like they stayed between Bethel and Ai, but Bethel and Ai were not affiliated with that, and you would have known more about that at the time of Moses rather than the time in the Bible. And so it's interesting, you see the author's writings and how he sees it, how he was inspired to write it. And so you see here, he goes from Hebron, and Beersheba up to Bethel area, which is right here, and then he goes north all the way to Haran. And he meets a guy named Laban, that is his uncle. And he wants to marry this girl named Rachel, which he sees, she's a shepherd. And so he asks Laban, "Can I marry Rachel?" He works 7 years for Rachel, for Laban to get Rachel, and Laban tricks him and gives him Leah instead. And then he works another 7 years, and he gets Rachel. And then after 20 years, he is very prosperous. He's gotten sheep, he's gotten goats. Laban changes his wage 10 times. That's what he says himself. And he goes down south to a place called Gilead. And let's go to chapter 33, moving right along. Chapter 33, verse 17. He's running away from Laban, and he is trying to go back to the promised land where God has wanted the Hebrews to live. And so in chapter 33, verse 17, "And Jacob journeyed to Succoth, and built him an house, and made booths for his cattle. Therefore the name of the place is called Succoth." And that is right, let's see, I have a map here. It is right in this area. Wait, sorry. Yes, it's right in this area, sorry. So it's by the Jabbok river, this river right here. And there's a place called Succoth. It's smaller, so they don't have it on this map. But it's in this area. So he comes up from Haran and goes towards Succoth. And then he goes to a place, the next verse 18 of chapter 33. And Jacob came to Shalem, a city of Shechem. Salem, a city of Shechem, which is in the land of Canaan. When he came from Padan Aram and pitched his tent before the city. So Padan Aram is up here by Haran, and that was like a little local city in the area of Haran. And so he comes down and pitches his tent near Shechem, and then here's Salem is in that area. And so that is the next place. He goes from here and crosses the Jordan River to Shechem. Then he goes to Bethel, which is south, right here. And that is where his wife Rachel dies. For chapter 35, verse 19. Let's go to chapter 35, verse 19. And Rachel died and was buried in the way to Ephrath, which is Bethlehem. And Jacob set a pillar upon her grave. That is the pillar of Rachel's grave unto this day. So he was living up here, and then he goes down to Bethlehem, and that is where Rachel dies. And it's interesting. It's Ephrath, which is the same thing as Bethlehem Ephrathah. And so it's the same, one and the same, and that is where Rachel dies. And then he continues to live. He goes down, and he lives in the land of Canaan, and he really just indwells it, and a lot happens there. But Joseph, one of his sons, is more prominent in the latter part of Genesis, and his brothers despise Joseph. Joseph goes down to Egypt, sets up he was sent as a slave. He becomes a second in command, and then this is where we get back to Jacob. Jacob, in the land of Famine, goes down to Egypt, and that is where he dies. And so that sort of wraps up the patriarchs and the maps, the geography of patriarchs. They start in Ur, they go to Haran, then they go to the Promised Land. They make a few trips back and forth to Egypt and to Gaza. They come back to get their wives, and that's their relatives back in Haran. And then at the end, Jacob ends up going back to Egypt, this region, and he dies there. And then in the Exodus, they come back out of Egypt, back into the land of promise, which is Canaan.